You mentioned that we need to develop our emotional core, and I'm not sure how to go about doing that.
No.
What would you suggest?
Well, it's not easy, but I think one has got to make an effort to maintain one's calm and equilibrium in whatever circumstance may arise. Not give in to sudden bouts of anger or anxiety or depression. You've got to make that effort. And every opportunity that arises is an opportunity for you to make that effort. And so it's a long process, but it is a process that you must consciously follow. That is the point I wanted to make.
Good evening, sir. I'm Ria. Just wanted to ask you, how do you keep yourself so active and so lively, and how does it all just work? It's just wonderful to see you smiling and happy like this.
Thank you very much. It's kind of you. I would say it's really Lord Shiva. I'm a worshipper of Lord Shiva. It's divine grace. It's also, as I said, an effort to continue to grow. One has to grow. One has to grow emotionally. One has to grow intellectually. One has to grow spiritually. And if you get onto the growth curve, then I think it keeps you more active. But if you get into the negative curve, then I think you go down very quickly.
It's been a long time, Dr. Karan Singh, that I heard a man of your erudition. So, congratulations and thank you so much for that really inspiring speech. But in our country, when we look around, I want to ask you, is there hope for leadership? There is leadership around, but is there hope for true leadership?
Yes, I think there is. Certainly, you see, I've seen 3 generations, maybe the intermediate generation not, but in the younger generation, I find a lot of energy, a lot of vitality, and a lot of commitment. And despite all the corruption and all the nepotism and all the negativity that we find around us, there is something in the Indian psyche which remains active. Otherwise, our civilization would not have continued for thousands of years with all the invasions and holocausts and massacres and colonials and so on, because there is something in the collective Indian psyche. Iqbal has a marvelous share, if you remember, कुछ बात है कि हस्ती मिटती नहीं हमारी सदियों रहा है दुश्मन दौरे ज़मां हमारा. So there is something in it, and I think that a renaissance in India is going to take place. We are on the verge of a new renaissance, because the whole of Indian history can be looked upon as a series of challenges and responses. And now that we have this tremendous challenge of globalization and of new leadership, I am optimistic that leadership will in fact appear.
I have a question about, you brought several reasons encouraging universal unity among humans and humankind, but we've seen how fast humans have progressed as a race in your lifetime alone in technology, encountering situations never before conceivable. In our lifetime, if we as a race are challenged by foreign entities such as an alien, is it our role to cooperate to progress the universe, or must we progress exclusively?
And I hope they're not like the ones we saw in those wretched films, Alien 1 and Alien 2 and all, the horrid creatures. Why they show aliens in such a negative light, I do not know. But if those sort of aliens come on us, God help us then. We should not cooperate with them. But there can be other aliens. For example, Close Encounters of the Third Kind. You remember that film? Long before all of you were born. Lovely aliens, beautiful aliens. So let's see what sort of aliens ultimately come.
So should we progress as a universe or as a race?
Well, let us see whether there are other worlds. Ultimately, it's the universe. I agree with you. The point you're making is ultimately even the earth is not the end. In your lifetime, you will see habitations on the moon. I always tell one of my grandchildren is here, I said, one day you'll go and say, let's take our summer holiday on the moon. There'll be a hotel there, you'll be able to go there. So the possibilities for the human race are infinite. and we've got to adjust ourselves accordingly, I think.
Thank you.
The question I have actually, we spent the last few days talking about leadership and developing young leaders. So I'm curious from your perspective, what are some of the greatest challenge or challenges that you think face the young leadership that's growing up today?
Well, the challenge, there are several major challenges. There is the challenge of the environment, the environmental challenges, which are very severe. There are challenges of these civil wars and conflicts that are now raging around the world. Look at what's happening in West Asia. We've had a whole series of disasters there. And that is a challenge. There's a challenge of ultimately getting rid of or controlling these. There's enough nuclear weaponry on this earth to destroy the world 100 times over. How is that going? Are we beginning to work on that? There's a challenge of population explosion, particularly in the developing countries that can least afford it. There's the challenge of corruption. Ethical values seem to have disappeared, and everybody is out for himself. I mean, that's true not only of India, but even the robber capitalism of the West, which just takes money from the people, and look at how some of the most powerful people in the world were led away in handcuffs in America now. So where is the value system? Again, that's why I stress that the challenge really, in one sentence, is to develop a positive, holistic value system that can deal with the changes that are bound to take place as we move into the global society.
Good evening, sir. My name is Manu. I'm a Teagle scholar. My question to you is, you talked about how to become a more global citizen. So having gone some places around the world, there's so much to intake, and there's so many cultures out there that we could be a part of and we can learn from. So my question is that it could get overwhelming. So what sort of balance would you suggest could we strike between incorporating these cultures and maintaining our own traditions and our own culture that we have grown up with?
That's a very good question. That's a matter which is coming to the fore increasingly now, particularly for traditional societies. How do we maintain our own cultural integrity while adopting what is best from other cultures? It is a question of really very carefully trying to choose what we think are desirable elements from various cultures. We cannot live in an island of our own nowadays. It's impossible. Even technology now has broken all these barriers. Therefore, we've got to try and absorb. What I find is happening in India often is that we are absorbing the worst of the West rather than the best. And the result is that we are falling between two stools. Again, the point I mentioned in the course of my remarks, that our multiple identities are there, and we have got to maintain a center around which then these identities can develop. And it is only if we do that that we can try and get what we find is best in various cultures. We cannot obviously have a sort of khichdi of cultures here and there, but we have to have a basic grounding in our own culture, and then we have to reach out to the other cultures.
Just a very basic question. You said how you've seen 3 generations live through such a long time, and you yourself epitomize leadership. But who, according to you, who do you think have been some of the most impactful leaders? And it could be across any field. But I just wanted to know your opinion.
You mean leaders who have impacted me?
Who you think have been really impactful, be it in the nation or be it in their own field?
Well, there are obviously obvious examples of people like Gandhi and Nelson Mandela and all whom I know. I've met all of them. I've even met Gandhiji. I've met Nelson Mandela. But let me tell you, the leaders who impacted me, my political guru was Jawaharlal Nehru, who, as you know, was a great freedom fighter and our first Prime Minister for 17 years. My intellectual guru was Dr. Radhakrishnan, who was a great thinker and a great orator. The two other people who have impacted me very deeply, whom I've never met, was Swami Vivekananda and Sri Aurobindo. Both of them were great thinkers. In the contemporary world, we've had people who've made extraordinary, for example, Nelson Mandela, I think is one of the most remarkable leaders that the world has seen. Gandhiji single-handedly shook the greatest empire the world had ever seen. And there are lots of people one can look around the world and find who have impacted various parts of history. Even Churchill, who was against Indian freedom and was a great imperialist, at one point in time, Churchill played a critical role in beating back the forces of fascism. FDR. America produces a great president only during a war. The first president was George Washington during the War of Independence. The second great president, Abraham Lincoln, during the Civil War. And the third great president, F.D. Roosevelt, during the Second World War. I hope we don't have to wait for a third war for the Americans to produce a leader. Obama is doing quite well, but not quite as well as we hope. But nonetheless.
Good evening, sir. I think a lot of these young leaders are at a really crucial developmental point in their lives, and you've been able to live such a rich and fulfilling one. So my question to you is, sir, if you were able to go back in time and sit down with your 20-year-old self, what would you tell him?
Well, there are lots of things I could tell him that I'm not going to tell you. But no, I just say that, despite all the ups and downs, one has gone through, I was, for example, let me tell you, before I was 18 years old, I had been in bed for 18 months, flat on my back. Can you imagine? 65 years ago, I landed in New York on the 31st of December and was driven in an ambulance to the hospital, where I stayed for a whole year. So one has been through these difficult periods. But I think one realizes that these periods either make you or break you. And difficult periods often are greater educators than periods of harmony and peace. For me, three things are tremendously important: the spiritual growth, music of all kinds, and books. These are the three main forces in my life. People also, I've met millions of people, but these are the three things from which I've learned a great deal, and from which I continue to learn a great deal. And life without music would not be really worth living, because music is really, as Sri Aurobindo says in one of his poems, all music is only the sound of his laughter. And therefore, whether it is Indian classical music or whether it is Western pop, my favorites are very old-fashioned: Dire Straits, Billy Joel, Whitney Houston, Pet Shop Boys. I didn't care for the Beatles that much. I thought they were a bit much. But those are the sort of groups. I followed rock and roll from the time Bill Haley and his Comets. They began. It wasn't Elvis. Elvis came later. It was Bill Haley and his Comets who started rock around the clock. If you wouldn't remember, you've heard about it. So that music is lovely, the rhythm, the beat, words. Poetry is lovely. Poetry is something one grows with. Let me recite a poem for you. Shivani wants me to sing. I'm not going to sing. But I'm going to recite, I can recite a poem. I can recite a poem of Yeats or of Sri Aurobindo. Of Yeats, I'll recite a poem. It's called The Song of Wandering Angus. Angus is some kind of a Gandharva sort of being. I went out to the hazel wood because a fire was in my head, and cut and peeled a hazel wand and hooked a berry to a thread. And when white moths were on the wing and moth-like stars were flickering out, I threw the berry in the stream and caught a little silver trout. When I had laid it on the floor, I went to blow the fire aflame. But something rustled on the floor, and someone called me by my name. It had become a glimmering girl with apple blossom in her hair, who called me by my name and ran and faded through the brightening air. Though I am old with wandering through hollow lands and hilly lands, I will find out where she has gone, and kiss her lips and take her hands, and walk amid long dappled grass, and pick till time and times are done, the silver apples of the moon, the golden apples of the sun. Okay.
Thank you very much for the poem. So my name is Narkis. I'm here. I wanted to ask you a question. As a spiritual person, how did you deal with it when you were in politics? Like, if you can share an ethical dilemma which you had, or in general, how were you able to keep your values and do your job?
It's very difficult in politics particularly. But I made an effort, I must say. I've tried in my political life, which I've been in public life now for 64 years. I started at the age of 18. I'm sure you boys are much older. Is there anybody here who's 18? Nobody here is 18. At 18, I became head of state, if you please. And for 18 years, I was head of state. Then at 36, I became a cabinet minister, and I've been MP. So all this time, one does come across dilemmas. You're absolutely right. You have to make choices. You don't always make the right choices. But as far as possible, one has got to try and do the right thing. I can't claim that I've always done the right thing. I'm sure I haven't. But I've made an effort to do the right thing. I think that's what really counts.
There's a grandson who's going to be called upon.
Sorry.
A grand young gentleman. But first, we have to give a grand applause for this grand gentleman.
Yes, Madam. I'm okay.
Not only has he always tried to do what's right, he's also tried to please all. And it was such a privilege. May I just request you to stay for a minute just to receive some flowers? Well, on behalf of Shiv Khemka, T. Gelf, Mrs. Ishwaran, and all those present here, thank you for being here, Dr. Karan Singh.